They say the happiest day of your life is your wedding day. Bullshit. Mine was a goddamn minefield, and the mines were all planted by her, Veronica, Eric's sister. My sister-in-law from hell. 5 years. 5 years I've been married to Eric, and 5 years I've been battling Veronica's condescending bullshit. Eric's 33, I'm teetering on the edge of 30. We're good, Eric and I, solid as a rock, except for this gaping chasm carved out by his family, by her. Veronica. Just the name tastes bitter in my mouth, like cheap wine after a perfect meal. 32, dripping in designer labels, married to some trust fund baby, and convinced she's landed on a higher plane of existence than the rest of us, mere mortals. I grew up busting my ass. My parents worked their fingers to the bone so I could have a decent life, not a luxury one. And according to Veronica, that's a cardinal sin. It makes me, what? A charity case? A project? No. In her eyes, I'm nothing more than a gold digger. She never says it outright, of course. That's not her style. It's the subtext, the dripping condescension in every syllable. The thinly veiled insults disguised as concern. The public humiliations that leave me burning with shame and rage. I should have seen the storm coming that very first meeting. We were at Eric's parents' place. A sprawling Victorian with a goddamn tennis court. I walked in, nervous as hell, trying to make a good impression. Veronica barely glanced at me. Just a quick, dismissive scan, like I was a stain on the antique rug. She smiled. A tight, fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sipped her wine, of course, it was wine, and asked Eric, loud enough for me to hear, "So, what exactly does she do again?" Like I wasn't standing right there. Like my existence was an inconvenient detail. Eric, bless his heart, told her about my job as a graphic designer. A good job. One I worked hard for. Veronica gave that fake, pleasant nod, the one that said, "Oh, how quaint," and said, "Oh, how interesting. Interesting like a bug under a microscope. Interesting like a historical artifact. Interesting like something to be dissected and judged." The wedding. Jesus Christ, the wedding. I should have known she'd pull something. I was so caught up in the fairy tale of it all, the white dress, the vows, the promise of forever, that I was blind to the viper in the garden. The speeches were going smoothly, or as smoothly as wedding speeches ever go. My dad's was sweet and rambling. My best friend's was hilarious and embarrassing. Then it was Veronica's turn. She took the mic, all smiles and practiced grace, and looked directly at Eric. I always thought he'd end up with someone ambitious, someone who would challenge him. A pause, a beat, a pregnant, awful silence. But love works in mysterious ways, doesn't it? The air in the room thickened. I could feel every eye on me burning into my skin. Awkward glances were exchanged. Half smiles died on people's faces. I wanted to crawl under the goddamn table and disappear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip that microphone out of her manicured hand and tell her exactly what I thought of her. But I didn't. I smiled. A brittle, painful smile that felt like my face would crack. I pretended it didn't sting. I pretended my sister-in-law hadn't just publicly implied that her brother had settled for me. Eric squeezed my hand, his face tight with anger. He'd deal with it later, he mouthed. Later. Always later. Later never came. That night, I lay in Eric's arms, the confetti still tangled in my hair, and cried. Soft, silent tears of humiliation and rage. He held me tight, whispering apologies, promising it wouldn't happen again. But it did. Oh, it did. After the wedding, the drips turned into a steady stream. Veronica got bolder, more brazen. The insults became more pointed. The humiliations more public. Family gatherings were my personal circle of hell. Every holiday, every birthday, every goddamn Sunday dinner was another opportunity for Veronica to chip away at my self-esteem. She'd point out any perceived flaw, any minor imperfection, with that sickeningly sweet tone. "Oh, have you gained a little weight, my name? Are you expecting?" A dramatic pause, a widening of the eyes. "Oh, just teasing. You take things so seriously. I'd force a laugh, trying to play along, trying to pretend it didn't hurt. But inside, I was crumbling. Piece by piece, she was tearing me down. When Eric and I struggled with infertility, the knife twisted deeper. Some women just aren't meant to be mothers, she'd say, her voice dripping with pity. Maybe it's just not in the cards for you. The cards, like my worth as a woman, as a human being, was determined by my ability to procreate. She'd bring up my past financial struggles at the dinner table, like it was casual conversation. It must be so nice to have financial security now, isn't it, my name? A loaded question, a subtle reminder that I came from less than they did. Eric would call her out, but only in private. He'd tell her to stop, tell her it wasn't okay, but he never truly shut her down in front of people. He thought she'd come around eventually. He was wrong. So tragically, pathetically wrong. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want to rock the boat. He wanted to keep the peace. But the peace he was so desperate to maintain was bought at my expense. With my dignity. With my sanity. And I let him. God, I let him. I swallowed my anger. I bit my tongue. I tried to be the bigger person. I thought if I just kept my head down, if I just ignored her venom, it would eventually stop. It didn't. It only emboldened her. Eric's weakness was my slow poison. He thought he was protecting me, but he was enabling her. And I was too blind, too desperate for his love and acceptance to see it. He'd comfort me afterward, holding me in his arms, whispering apologies. "I'm so sorry," he'd say. "I'll talk to her." She doesn't mean it, but she did mean it. Every single word, every single jab, every single carefully constructed humiliation was deliberate, calculated, designed to make me feel small, insignificant, less. And for a long time, it worked. I started to believe her. I started to question my worth. I started to wonder if Eric had settled for me. If I was, in fact, not good enough for him. The mirror became my enemy. Every perceived flaw was magnified. Every imperfection amplified. I obsessed over my weight, my clothes, my career. I tried to mold myself into the image of the perfect woman Veronica so effortlessly portrayed. It was exhausting. It was soul-crushing. And it was never enough. Because Veronica wasn't interested in me improving myself. She was interested in keeping me down. She was a master of psychological warfare. A queen bee ruling her hive with a sting that was both subtle and devastating. And I was her target. The final straw. Jesus, just thinking about it makes my blood boil. It was 2 weeks ago. Another goddamn family dinner. At Eric's parents' place, of course. The same goddamn Victorian. The same goddamn dining room. The same goddamn suffocating atmosphere of forced pleasantries and simmering resentments. For a while, things were almost normal. The conversation was light. The food was decent. And Veronica, for once, seemed to be keeping her claws sheathed. I actually started to relax, to breathe, to think that maybe, just maybe, things were finally turning a corner. I should have known better. We were talking about Eric's career, his recent promotion. He was beaming, proud of his accomplishments, and rightfully so. He'd worked his ass off for it. Then Veronica, in that smug, condescending tone that I had come to despise, announced to the entire table, "You know, Eric used to date women with real ambition before he settled down." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Everything went silent. My ears started ringing. My vision narrowed. All I could see was Veronica, her perfectly sculpted face, her smug, knowing smile. Something inside me snapped. Something that had been building for 5 long years finally reached its breaking point. I put my fork down, deliberately. The clatter of the silver against the china seemed deafening in the sudden silence. I looked her straight in the eye. No more forced smiles. No more pretending. No more swallowing my anger. "Veronica," the first said, my voice dangerously calm. That was incredibly out of line. The table went silent. Every eye was on us. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Veronica blinked, then gave me that fake, condescending laugh. "Oh, you're so sensitive, my name. Can't you take a joke?" This time, I didn't let it slide. I didn't back down. I didn't pretend it was okay. No, I said, my voice still calm, but now laced with steel. I'm not sensitive. I'm just tired of pretending your comments are okay. She wasn't expecting that. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of surprise, the brief moment of vulnerability. She looked around the table as if expecting someone to back her up, to validate her behavior. But no one did. Eric shifted in his seat, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. His parents looked down at their plates, avoiding eye contact. Even her husband, the trust fund Ken doll, seemed uncomfortable. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. That night after we got home, I told Eric I was done. Done with the insults. Done with the humiliations. Done with the endless cycle of apologies and empty promises. Either you put your foot down, I said, my voice shaking with anger and exhaustion, or I will. And I meant it. Every word. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness, my sanity, for the sake of his family. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain and guilt. He knew I was serious. He knew I was at my breaking point. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I want you to choose, I said. Choose me. Choose us. Or lose us both. The ultimatum hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating weight. I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing, my heart pounding. Was I being too harsh? Was I being unfair? Was I risking everything for a battle I couldn't win? But I knew deep down that I couldn't go back. I had endured too much. I had sacrificed too much. I had reached my limit. I needed him to choose. And if he didn't choose me, then I knew what I had to do. I would walk away. The next day, I was a mess. A walking, talking, emotional disaster. I couldn't focus at work, I couldn't eat, I couldn't even think straight. I needed to talk to someone. Someone who understood. Someone who wouldn't judge me. Someone who would just listen. I called Chloe my best friend since high school. She's the kind of friend who knows you better than you know yourself. The kind who always has your back, no matter what. Meet me for coffee, I said, my voice trembling. I need to vent. We met at our usual spot, a small, cozy cafe tucked away on a quiet side street. The smell of coffee and pastries usually calmed me, but today, it did little to soothe my frayed nerves. I poured out everything to Chloe. The years of insults, the endless humiliations, the breaking point at the family dinner. I told her about the ultimatum I had given Eric, the fear and uncertainty that gnawed at me. Chloe listened patiently, her eyes filled with sympathy and concern. When I was finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Honey, she said, I'm so sorry you've been going through this. Veronica is a toxic bitch, and Eric needs to grow a pair and stand up to her. Chloe never minced words. That's one of the things I loved about her. I know, I said, sighing, but what am I supposed to do? I can't keep living like this. I'm exhausted. Then don't, Chloe said, her eyes hardening. Don't let her win. Don't let her control you. It's not that easy, I said. She's Eric's sister. She's always going to be a part of his life. Maybe? Chloe said, shrugging. But that doesn't mean you have to let her walk all over you. You need to fight back. Fight back? I said, raising an eyebrow. How? I don't want to stoop to her level. You don't have to stoop, Chloe said, a mischievous glint in her eye. You just have to turn the tables. Turn the tables? I said, confused. What do you mean? I mean, Chloe said, leaning forward. Why not give her a taste of her own medicine? Show her what it feels like to be humiliated, to be the target. I stared at her, shocked. The idea of deliberately trying to hurt Veronica was unsettling. It wasn't who I was. I don't know, Chloe, I said, hesitating. I'm not sure I can do that. I don't want to become like her. You wouldn't be becoming like her, Chloe said, shaking her head. You'd be defending yourself. You'd be drawing a line in the sand. You'd be showing her that you're not a doormat. I thought about it, about all the years of abuse, the endless cycle of disrespect, about the power Veronica wielded over me, the way she seemed to revel in my pain, and something started to shift inside me, a spark of defiance, a flicker of anger. What did you have in mind? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe grinned. Oh, I have a few ideas, she said. Let's just say Veronica's reign of terror is about to come to an end. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake Chloe's words from my mind. Turn the tables. Give her a taste of her own medicine. Fight back. At first, I dismissed the idea. I didn't want to sink to her level. I didn't want to become the kind of person who deliberately tried to hurt others. But then I thought about how much I had endured. How every attempt to keep the peace had only empowered Veronica. How she had been allowed to run rampant, unchecked, for far too long. And I realized something. Veronica wasn't going to stop until she was forced to. She wasn't going to change her behavior unless she faced some serious consequences. And I was done letting her walk all over me. Eric had promised to set boundaries, to finally put his foot down. But I wasn't convinced. I knew that if I wanted real change, I had to handle it myself. In 2 weeks, Veronica was hosting a massive family reunion. Everyone would be there. It was the perfect opportunity. If she tried anything again, this time I'd be ready. Veronica had no idea what was coming. The next 2 weeks felt like gearing up for war. Not a literal war, of course, but a war nonetheless. A war for my sanity, my dignity, my life. Chloe was my general, strategizing and brainstorming with ruthless efficiency. She'd been a silent observer of Veronica's cruelty for years, and she was itching for a chance to unleash hell. First things first, she said, tapping her manicured nails on the table. We need ammunition. Ammunition. The word sent a shiver down my spine. It sounded so calculated, so mean. But then I thought of Veronica's arsenal. The years of carefully curated insults, the expertly aimed barbs, and I realized that I needed weapons of my own. What kind of ammunition? I asked. The kind that hurts, Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. The kind that exposes her for the bitch she is. We started by going through old messages, years' worth of passive-aggressive texts, snide comments, and voice memos where she joked about how I wasn't good enough for Eric. The digital breadcrumbs of her relentless campaign. It was agonizing, reliving all those moments of humiliation and self-doubt. But it was also empowering. Seeing it all laid out in black and white, the sheer volume of her venom made me realize just how much I had endured. And it wasn't just texts. I had clips too. My best friend, bless her heart, had recorded parts of my wedding. Just snippets here and there, candid moments of laughter and celebration. And sure enough, she had captured Veronica's little speech about how Eric had settled. Hearing it again, cold and detached, made my stomach churn. It was even worse than I remembered. This is gold, Chloe said, her eyes wide. Pure gold. This is what we're going to use to take her down. I spent hours organizing the evidence, categorizing each insult, each humiliation, each carefully crafted barb. It was like building a case, a legal case against my sister-in-law. Eric was still hesitant. He kept saying he'd talked to her, that she'd apologized, that things would be different. He was clinging to the hope that she could change, that she could somehow become the loving, supportive sister he wanted her to be. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. I'd seen this movie before, and I knew how it ended. With me lying in bed, crying myself to sleep, while Veronica continued her reign of terror. It's not going to work, Eric, I said, my voice tired. She's not going to change. She's never going to accept me. He looked at me, his face etched with pain. I don't want to hurt her, he said. You're not hurting her, I said, my voice hardening. You're protecting yourself. You're protecting us, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what to do, he said. Then let me handle it, I said. Just trust me, please. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay, he said, but promise me you won't do anything you'll regret. I couldn't promise him that. Then I reached out to Jake, Eric's younger brother. If there was one person in the family who hated Veronica's behavior as much as I did, it was him. He had always been the black sheep, the rebel, the one who refused to play by her rules. He was blunt about it too. told me he'd spent years dealing with their sister's controlling behavior, and honestly, he was surprised I hadn't snapped earlier. "She's a goddamn nightmare," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "She thinks she's the queen of the world, and everyone else is just a peasant." I told him about my plan, about the family reunion, about my intention to finally stand up to her. He listened intently, then burst out laughing. "You're going to do it?" he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "You're actually going to take her down?" "That's the plan," I said, smiling. "I'm in," he said without hesitation. "Anything I can do to help, just let me know. I've been waiting for someone to put her in her place for years." With Jake on my side, I felt a surge of confidence. I wasn't alone in this. I had allies, people who believed in me, people who were just as tired of Veronica's bullshit as I was. The pieces were falling into place. The ammunition was gathered. The allies were assembled. The battle lines were drawn. I walked into that reunion ready. The family reunion was set to take place at Veronica's house. Of course. A sprawling mansion overlooking the goddamn ocean, a testament to her husband's inherited wealth and her own perceived superiority. The kind of place that screamed, "Look at me! I'm rich! I'm successful! I'm better than you." The perfect stage for her to hold court, to remind everyone why she was the most important person in the room. But this time, things were going to be different. This time, I wasn't going to play the victim. This time, I was going to be the predator. As we drove up the long, winding driveway, my heart pounded in my chest. I was terrified, but I was also exhilarated. I was finally ready to confront my tormentor. The moment we stepped through the door, Veronica locked eyes on me, like a hawk spotting prey. Her smile was tight, her eyes cold. She knew something was different. She could sense the shift in power. I smiled back, a genuine smile this time. A smile that said, "I'm not afraid of you anymore, it didn't take long." We exchanged pleasantries, the usual forced smiles and hollow greetings. I sat down, carefully positioning my purse on the chair beside me. Inside, nestled among my lipstick and wallet, was my weapon, a small digital recorder filled with the evidence of Veronica's abuse. She couldn't resist. She never could. As I sat down, she looked at me with that sickeningly sweet smirk and announced to the room, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, my name, did you finally learn how to cook? Or is Eric still ordering takeout every night?" There it was. The opening she gave me. The chance to strike. I let out a small laugh. Not an angry one, not defensive, just amused. Then, with the most casual tone I could muster, I said, "Oh, Veronica, you always have such creative ways of trying to insult me. It's honestly impressive." Silence. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they were supposed to laugh. Her husband choked on his wine. Eric stared at me, his eyes wide with surprise. Veronica blinked a few times, like she hadn't expected me to respond at all. She tried to backtrack with a fake chuckle, but the moment had already passed. "I was just joking," she said, her voice faltering. "I know," I said, smiling sweetly. "But your jokes are always so interesting. They really say a lot about you." Throughout the evening, every time she made a passive-aggressive remark, I responded in the same calm, even tone. Nothing angry, nothing emotional, just simple, direct statements that exposed the pettiness of her words. When she tried to bring up my job in a condescending way, I tilted my head and smiled. "That's funny," I said. "Eric was just telling me the other day how proud he is of my career. But I guess some people just enjoy tearing others down." That one made Eric snap to attention. He had heard the comments for years, but he had never really processed how they sounded in front of a crowd. This time he actually backed me up. "Yeah, sis," he said, his voice firm. "I don't get why you always say things like that." "It's not funny," Veronica faltered. "It was just a joke," she stammered. "I don't think it is," Eric responded, his voice cold. The power was shifting. For the first time, the weight of the conversation wasn't falling on me. It was falling on her. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the barely concealed rage. She was losing control. Her carefully constructed image of superiority was starting to crack. And then I dropped the real bombshell. Veronica had always loved bringing up my family's financial background, acting like I should be grateful to be part of her world. She did it again that night, an offhand comment about how not everyone grew up with financial security. I just smiled. "Oh, that's actually a great point," I said. "Speaking of financial security, I wonder if everyone knows that Eric and I paid off that debt of yours last year?" The entire room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Veronica's face turned bright red. "That's not true," she snapped. "It is true," I said, my voice calm and even. Gasps rippled through the room. A few people glanced at each other. Even some of the relatives who normally stayed out of things looked at her differently now. She tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it as a joke, but it was too late. The damage was done. Then Jake, who had been holding back all night, finally cut in. "Come on, Veronica," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You love talking about how much better you are than everyone else. And here you were, needing their money." That was it. The final blow. Veronica stormed off, mumbling something about how we had ruined the night. But the damage was done. The whispers started immediately. I could hear relatives talking amongst themselves, some even sending me looks of sympathy. The ones who had been neutral before, they weren't anymore. And as I stood there watching Veronica disappear into another room, I realized something. For the first time ever, she was the one embarrassed. Round one, mine. The fallout from the reunion was immediate and spectacular. It was like setting off a bomb in the middle of a perfectly manicured garden. The explosion sent shrapnel flying in every direction, tearing apart the carefully cultivated facade of the family. By the time Eric and I got home that night, my phone was already buzzing incessantly. Messages from family members, some supportive, some confused, some downright angry. Cousins and distant aunts who had always kept quiet messaged me privately, saying they never realized just how cruel Veronica was until they saw it unfold in real time. "I always thought you were exaggerating," one aunt admitted, "but now I see. She's been awful to you for years." Others, the die-hard Veronica supporters, sent messages dripping with thinly veiled disapproval. "Family is everything," one message read. "You shouldn't air your dirty laundry in public. This could have been handled privately," Chloe called, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Did you see her face?" she cackled. "She looked like she wanted to die. You totally destroyed her, my name. I'm so proud of you." Eric's parents, bless their hearts, sent a short, somewhat cryptic message. "We need to talk," it read. Veronica, of course, refused to listen. She refused to acknowledge the damage she had caused. Instead, she doubled down, calling me too sensitive and saying I had blown everything out of proportion. "It was just a joke," she shrieked over the phone when Eric finally answered one of her calls. "You're ruining our family because you can't take a joke." He hung up on her. That's when I made my final move. I told Eric I was going low contact from now on. If Veronica insulted me, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to leave. If she tried to bait me into a fight, I wasn't going to engage. If she wanted to see us, it would be on our terms, not hers. Eric, to my surprise, agreed without hesitation. It was like a switch had flipped inside him. He had finally seen the light, finally understood the depth of Veronica's toxicity. "I'm done with this," he said, his voice firm. "I'm done letting her control us." And that's when I knew something had changed. Something fundamental. Because Veronica thrives on control. She needs to be the center of attention, the one dictating how things go. And for the first time, she was losing that power. Within days, she started backpedaling. The love bombing began. Long, emotional texts filled with dramatic statements about how she never meant to hurt anyone, how everything was just a misunderstanding. She insisted that I had taken things too seriously and that she was only ever joking. Eric barely glanced at his phone. He didn't respond, just kept scrolling past the messages as if they weren't there. But I could tell this was uncharted territory for him. For years, he had always tried to keep the peace, always brushed off her behavior because it was easier than confronting it. Now, for the first time, he was ignoring her outright. When the texts didn't work, she escalated. The calls started, one after another all day long. She left voicemails that swung wildly between sweet and desperate. One minute she was tearfully saying she just wanted to talk. The next she was ranting about how I was manipulating her brother. Eric let the calls go unanswered, but after 3 days, she started calling from different numbers. She even left a voicemail on our home phone, one we barely used anymore, sobbing about how I had turned Eric against his own sister. That's when the extended family started getting involved. Some relatives, mostly the ones who had seen how Veronica treated me firsthand, stayed out of it or reached out in support. Jake, as expected, was firmly on my side. He sent me screenshots of the messages Veronica had been blasting in the family group chat, complaining that Eric and I were punishing her. But others weren't so quiet. A few of the older relatives, ones who had known Veronica her whole life, started pushing back. Messages rolled in urging Eric to be the bigger person. One aunt even had the audacity to suggest that I should apologize, just to smooth things over. Eric still didn't respond. And that's when Veronica lost it completely. Late one night, Eric's phone buzzed with a long, angry text from her. A full-on rant, unleashed in all its unfiltered, venomous glory. She accused me of being a manipulative gold digger who had brainwashed her brother. She claimed I had poisoned their relationship and that I was nothing but an opportunist who had latched onto Eric for his money. Eric sat on the couch, staring at his phone, reading the message over and over. He didn't say a word at first, just let out a slow, shaky breath. He blocked his screen and passed me the phone. I read through it quickly. The words were venomous, dripping with bitterness and resentment. And for the first time, they weren't sugar-coated, disguised as jokes or veiled in condescension. This was pure, unadulterated hatred. Eric sat back, his face conflicted. I knew she was bad, he muttered, but seeing it all laid out like this. He trailed off, his voice choked with emotion. I put my hand on his arm, squeezing it gently. It's okay, I said. It's out in the open now. His hesitation lingered, but as I showed him more messages, more evidence of her years of abuse, his expression hardened. I can't let this continue, he said, his voice low and firm. I think it's time we make some real changes instead of just brushing it off. We planned our next steps together, a united front against the storm. Then, with a surge of defiant satisfaction, I typed one simple sentence underneath. Veronica's rant. Thank you for finally saying how you really feel, Veronica. Now we don't have to pretend anymore. And I hit send. The reaction was instant. Some family members immediately went silent, horrified by the explicit hatred in Veronica's message. Others, the ones who had been sitting on the fence, started privately messaging me, expressing their shock and dismay. Linda, realizing she had made a colossal mistake, went into damage control. She sent a follow-up message claiming she was just emotional and that she didn't mean it. Please, guys, she wrote, I was just upset. I love you both. Let's not let this ruin our family. No one was buying it. A cousin sent a message in the chat, calling her out for her behavior. An uncle chimed in, saying that if this was how she talked about me in text, he could only imagine what she said behind my back. Jake, never one to hold back, openly asked, so if my name is a gold digger, why did she and Eric pay off your debt last year, Veronica? Silence. Veronica didn't respond. I thought that might be the end of it. That maybe, just maybe, she'd realize she'd lost and would finally let it go. But I had underestimated just how far she was willing to go, how deeply entrenched her need for control truly was. The next morning, Eric's phone lit up with another message from her. Short, blunt, final. If you don't leave her, it read, you're no longer my brother. Eric didn't even hesitate. He stared at the screen for a second, then, without an ounce of emotion, replied, then I guess you don't have a brother anymore. And just like that, the bridge burned. Veronica had been playing a game, expecting Eric to fold under pressure. She thought he'd beg, that he'd come running back, desperate to fix things. But he didn't. He put his phone down, looked at me, and said, she finally crossed the line. I'm done. No anger, no hesitation, no second guessing. just pure, simple exhaustion. Veronica must have realized too late that she had pushed too far. Within minutes, another message came through, softer this time, laced with desperation. She claimed she didn't mean it, that she was just scared of losing him. Eric didn't even read the whole thing. He blocked her number. And just like that, she was cut off. The silence was deafening. Veronica had always loved being the center of attention, but this wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. Word spread fast through the family. Within days, almost everyone knew about the message she had sent to Eric, demanding he leave me or lose her as a sister. They knew about Eric's simple, devastating reply. They knew about her desperate attempts to backtrack and his cold, unwavering rejection. The gossip started. Relatives were calling each other, exchanging shocked reactions, and trying to figure out how things had escalated so quickly. A few family members, mostly the ones who had stayed neutral before, started reaching out to me directly. Some admitted they had ignored Veronica's behavior for years and regretted it. Others said they had always known she was controlling, but never thought she would go that far. Jake was the first to call, and he could barely get a sentence out between laughing. He told me I had done what everyone else had been too scared to do, finally put Veronica in her place. He had dealt with his sister's controlling nature for years, but had never seen anyone shut her down like that before. But Veronica wasn't going to go down quietly. When ignoring us didn't work, when love bombing failed, when threats and ultimatums backfired spectacularly, Veronica switched tactics. She went full victim. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, and unfortunately, it was aimed squarely at tearing me apart. She started reaching out to relatives, spinning a whole new story about how I was isolating Eric from his family, how I was a manipulative force tearing them apart. She painted herself as the poor, abandoned sister whose evil sister-in-law had brainwashed her brother into cutting her off. A few of her usual enablers, the ones who blindly supported her no matter what, jumped on board. They sent me passive-aggressive messages about how family should stick together and how you shouldn't come between siblings. That's when Eric stepped in, a goddamn hero. He sent a mass message to the family. Simple, direct, and with no room for misinterpretation. I want to make something very clear. I made the decision to go no contact with my sister. My name didn't force me. I did this because I've had enough of the way she treats my wife and me. If anyone has a problem with that, you can consider yourself blocked too. That shut most people up. The messages slowed to a trickle, the relatives pushing Veronica's agenda backed off, and a fragile sense of peace settled over our lives. But Veronica, ever the drama queen, wasn't finished. She escalated again, this time taking to Facebook. A long, emotional post appeared on her profile, filled with fake sorrow and revisionist history. She claimed that a sister's love is unconditional, even when her brother is manipulated against her. She wrote about how she had been abandoned by her own flesh and blood, how she only ever wanted what was best for Eric, but outside influences had poisoned him against her. She posted a picture of her and Eric as children, a sentimental image designed to tug at the heartstrings and elicit sympathy. She expected sympathy. She expected her friends and followers to rally to her defense, to shower her with love and support. At first, some of her friends jumped to her defense, sending love messages and expressing their outrage at Eric's supposed betrayal. Others hesitated, unsure of the full story. They knew Veronica, knew her tendency to exaggerate and distort the truth. But as more people came forward, Jake, other relatives, even acquaintances who had seen her behavior firsthand, the tide began to turn. Comments started appearing on her post, questioning her narrative, challenging her victimhood. Maybe you should respect your brother's choices, one comment read. This sounds like a personal problem. Why is your first instinct to post this on Facebook instead of fixing things privately? If you're being cut off, another comment stated, there's usually a reason. Maybe you should take a good look at your own behavior before blaming everyone else. Weren't you just escorted out of their baby shower by security? Someone else pointed out. Seems like you're the one who's been causing all the drama. The post was up for 2 days before she finally deleted it, but by then, the screenshots had already spread like wildfire. Her credibility was shattered. The carefully constructed image of the loving, supportive sister was in tatters. Eric's parents, who had mostly stayed silent throughout this entire mess, reached out to me directly. The conversation was short, but it was significant. They told me they had always known Veronica was difficult, but they had never realized the extent of her cruelty. They admitted they had enabled her behavior for years, always preferring to stay in the background rather than confront her. We thought it was just her way of showing she cared, Eric's mother confessed, her voice laced with regret. But we see now we should have stepped in long ago. They told me they were ashamed of Veronica's actions and that they supported our decision to go no contact. They promised to distance themselves from her completely. That was it. The final break. Linda wasn't just losing Eric. She was losing her grip on the entire family. With every passing day, she got more desperate. She started sending messages about family emergencies, sudden illnesses, and crises that required Eric's immediate attention. It was nothing serious, just vague statements designed to guilt-trip him into reaching out. He didn't fall for it. Then, one of Veronica's own friends reached out to me. Someone I had met maybe once or twice, but had never really spoken to. She admitted that Veronica had a long history of toxic behavior and that I wasn't the first person she had bullied. Apparently, she had done this before with other women Eric had dated. Some lasted longer than others, but in the end, they had all left. I was just the first one who fought back. That's when it became clear. Veronica had always assumed she could get away with this. She had always expected Eric to choose her, to fold under pressure. She had never once considered the possibility that she could actually lose. And now, her social circle was shrinking. More and more people were distancing themselves from her. The queen bee was losing her sting. Eric and I felt a weight lift off our shoulders. We didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. No more worrying about what she would say. No more tense holidays. No more drama to endure. To celebrate, we booked a weekend getaway. Just a small trip to a cozy cabin in the mountains. Nothing extravagant, but it was the first time in years that we truly felt free from her influence. While we were away, a package arrived at our house. It was from Veronica. Inside was a handwritten letter, neatly folded, along with a small box of expensive chocolates. The letter was long, too full of self-pity and revisionist history. I didn't read it. I tossed it straight into the trash. I couldn't risk being pulled back in. I needed to protect myself, to protect our peace. Months passed. A blissful, unbelievable stretch of time. For the first time since I had married Eric, life felt genuinely peaceful. No snide comments, no backhanded insults disguised as jokes, no family gatherings filled with tense silence and forced smiles. Veronica had been completely cut off, and the weight of her toxicity was finally gone. Eric and I thrived. We went on more trips, spent quality time together, and actually enjoyed our holidays. We laughed more, argued less, and rediscovered the joy in our relationship. Jake kept in touch occasionally, updating us on the family's reaction. Some relatives had distanced themselves from Veronica after the drama, disgusted by her behavior. Others still clung to the idea that we should forgive and move on, that family is more important than anything. But Linda, however, had gone quiet. No texts, no phone calls, no attempts to force her way back in. It was too quiet. Unnervingly so. I knew she wasn't the type to give up easily. She was waiting, lurking in the background, looking for the perfect moment to strike, to force her way back into our lives. And that moment arrived the day Eric and I announced we were expecting a baby. We had been trying for years, enduring countless rounds of fertility treatments and the emotional roller coaster that came with them. The news that I was finally pregnant was a miracle, a dream come true. We shared the news on social media, a simple post with an ultrasound picture and a caption about how excited we were to start this new chapter. We were flooded with messages of congratulations and well wishes from friends and family. And within an hour, Veronica was blowing up our phones. First, it was the calls. Over and over, her name flashed across Eric's screen, a persistent, unwelcome reminder of the chaos she represented. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The thought of hearing her voice, of being subjected to her manipulative tactics, was enough to send him spiraling. The calls didn't stop. She switched numbers using burner phones, friends' phones, anything she could get her hands on. It was relentless, a desperate attempt to break through the wall we had so carefully erected. Then the text started. Long, rambling paragraphs, one after another. She was suddenly overjoyed for us, gushing about how excited she was to be an aunt, how much she loved babies. She had so many ideas for the nursery. She couldn't wait to meet her precious niece or nephew. It was sickening. The sudden change in tone, the saccharine sweetness, the complete disregard for her past behavior. It was all a calculated act, designed to manipulate us, to guilt us into letting her back in. Eric ignored every message. He couldn't bring himself to even acknowledge her existence. That night, an email came through. One of those long-winded, dramatic ones she excelled at. She demanded to be a part of the baby's life. She deserved to be involved. She would not be left out. This baby was her niece or nephew, and she had a right to be in their life. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated audacity of this woman. After everything she had done, after all the pain she had inflicted, she had the nerve to demand a place in our child's life. Eric sent one response. Short, brutal, final. You are not part of our lives anymore. Stop contacting us. That should have been the end of it. A clear, concise statement that left no room for interpretation. But Veronica, predictably, refused to accept it. She refused to believe that she couldn't have what she wanted. She reached out to family members, spinning her usual web of lies. She sobbed to them about how I was stealing her future niece or nephew from her, how I was a jealous, vindictive woman who was determined to keep her away from her family. She played the heartbroken sister act, telling anyone who would listen that I had brainwashed Eric, that I was controlling him, that he wasn't thinking for himself. Some relatives, the ones who had always been susceptible to her manipulations, tried to intervene. A cousin sent a message about how families should stick together, even when things are difficult. An aunt called to ask if we could at least let Veronica be a part of the baby's life, even if it was just from a distance. I shut it down quickly. I wouldn't let a stranger treat me like that, I said, my voice firm. So why would I allow it from family? That answer seemed to make its way through the grapevine. The messages slowed, the relatives pushing Veronica's agenda backed off, and a fragile truce was declared. But Veronica, she escalated. Again. It was her signature move. When all else failed, she went bigger, bolder, more unhinged. Days later, Eric got a call from his workplace. Security reported that someone had been lurking near the entrance, repeatedly asking to speak with him. When they approached her, she claimed she was just checking in on her brother, making sure he was okay. But when security insisted she leave, she became agitated, ranting about how I had brainwashed him, how he wasn't himself anymore. It wasn't a full-blown public spectacle, but it was unsettling enough for Eric to consider taking further legal steps. The thought of her stalking him at work, disrupting his life, filled me with a cold, simmering rage. We documented everything. Eric saved every single email, every text message, every phone log. We consulted a lawyer who advised us to file a police report to establish a record of harassment. Since Veronica had already shown up at Eric's workplace and sent harassing emails, he recommended we pursue a restraining order. We did. We spent hours filling out paperwork, gathering evidence, reliving the trauma of her abuse. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. We needed to protect ourselves, to protect our baby from her escalating behavior. A few weeks later, we received notice that our request for a restraining order was granted, legally barring her from contacting us or coming near Eric's workplace. It was a small victory, a temporary reprieve from her relentless attacks. But before we could even celebrate, before we could fully process the relief of knowing we were finally safe, Linda made her most unhinged move yet. She crashed my baby shower. The event was being held at a nice venue, a bright, airy space decorated with pastel balloons and floral arrangements. It was a beautiful afternoon, filled with laughter, gifts, and the warm support of friends and family. People who actually cared about me, who celebrated my happiness without an undercurrent of jealousy or resentment. Everything was perfect. The sun was shining, the food was delicious, and I was surrounded by love. And for a brief, shining moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we had finally escaped Veronica's shadow. I should have known better. Just as I was opening a particularly thoughtful gift from Chloe, the doors burst open. All conversation stopped. It wasn't just walking in like a normal person. It was a performance, a carefully orchestrated display of grief and desperation. Tears streamed down her face, her hands trembled dramatically, and a loud gasp escaped her lips as she fell to her knees in the middle of the room, sobbing that I was ripping her niece-nephew away from her. The room went dead silent. The music cut off. Every eye was on her. A few guests who had only heard about Veronica's behavior secondhand sat frozen in shock, unsure of how to react. Others, like Jake, rolled their eyes, already expecting something like this. They knew Veronica, knew her talent for creating chaos and drama. Veronica wailed, loud, dramatic, attention-grabbing. She clutched her chest, looking around at the guests like she was searching for support, for validation. I stood up, calm as ever. Inside, I was a whirlwind of anger and fear, but I refused to let her see it. I refused to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had rattled me. "You weren't invited, Veronica," the first said, my voice clear and steady. "Leave." She didn't move. She just continued to sob, louder now, more theatrical. "You can't do this to me," she cried out, her voice trembling with feigned emotion. "I'm the aunt. This is my family too." Security was already on their way. I had planned for this. I had known deep down that if she was ever going to try something, it would be here, at an event where she could maximize her audience, where she could inflict the most damage. As the security guards entered the room, Veronica scrambled to her feet, desperate now. She spun toward the guests, her voice rising, her finger pointing accusingly at me. "She's poisoned my brother against me," she shrieked. "She's destroying our family. She won't even let me see my niece-nephew. I'm being shut out of my own family's life. I didn't react." I didn't get emotional. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Veronica, maybe you should tell everyone about the emails you've been sending to Eric's workplace." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the sympathy wavering, the support faltering. Veronica froze. For the first time, she was speechless. The carefully constructed facade of the wronged sister was starting to crumble. The guests started murmuring, whispering to each other. A few turned to Eric, waiting for confirmation. He nodded, his face grim. He pulled out his phone and held up the email screenshots, displaying them for everyone to see. The evidence of her harassment, her threats, her unhinged obsession. There was no way to deny it. No way to spin it. No way to escape the consequences of her actions. The moment was over. The security guards grabbed Veronica's arms firmly, leading her toward the exit. She kicked and screamed the whole way, railing against me, against Eric, against the entire family. "This isn't her!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." The door slammed shut. She was gone. The guests sat there, stunned. The pastel balloons and floral arrangements seemed strangely out of place, a stark contrast to the drama that had just unfolded. Then, one by one, they started talking. The murmur of voices grew louder, more animated. The air thrummed with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a dawning realization. A few people approached me, their faces etched with apology. They admitted they had always thought I was exaggerating about Veronica's behavior, that I was being too sensitive, too dramatic. But now, after witnessing her meltdown firsthand, they understood. They finally saw her for who she truly was. Others apologized for ever doubting me, for ever questioning my sanity. They confessed they had been afraid to take sides, afraid to challenge Veronica's authority. Even relatives who had been neutral before, who had always tried to stay out of the family drama, were shaken by what they had just witnessed. They had seen the crazy behind the designer clothes, the manipulation behind the sweet smile. Jake shook his head, a mixture of amusement and disgust on his face. "She just humiliated herself in front of everyone," he said. "You finally broke her, my name. You finally broke the beast." And he was right. Veronica had spent years trying to make me look bad, trying to undermine my credibility, trying to paint me as the villain. But in the end, she had exposed herself. She had revealed her true colors. And the world had finally seen it. After the baby shower disaster, Veronica disappeared. No calls, no texts, no more dramatic Facebook rants. Just complete radio silence. At first, it seemed suspicious. Too quiet. She had never backed down before. She had always fought tooth and nail for what she wanted. But as weeks passed with no signs of her, no new attempts to disrupt our lives, it started to feel real. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally given up. Maybe she had finally realized that she couldn't win. Maybe, just maybe, we were finally free. Then, 3 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. Thick, official-looking, bearing the name of a law firm. It was from Veronica, or rather, from her lawyer. She was trying to sue for visitation rights. As an aunt, Eric and I sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread out between us, reading it in disbelief. We stared at each other, speechless, our minds reeling from the sheer audacity of it all. She was actually trying to force her way back into our child's life through the court system. After everything, after the harassment, the stalking, the restraining order, the public meltdowns, she had the nerve to claim she deserved to be a part of our baby's life. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "She's insane." "I know," Eric said, his face pale. "I don't understand how she can think she has a chance. We didn't even need to discuss what to do next. It was automatic, instinctual." Eric picked up his phone, dialed our lawyer, and within the hour, we had a meeting scheduled. Our lawyer, a seasoned professional who had seen it all, listened patiently as we explained the situation, his expression growing increasingly incredulous with each detail. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "This is remarkable," he said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "I've handled some messy family disputes, but this takes the cake." He assured us that Veronica had no legal standing whatsoever. She had never met our baby. She had never been involved in my pregnancy. She had actively harassed us for months, and she had a restraining order against her. There was no case here, just a desperate last-ditch attempt to regain control. "She has absolutely no legal rights to see your child," our lawyer said, his voice firm. "This is just a scare tactic, a way to try to intimidate you and force you to cave." He explained that we still had to go through the process, filing our response, attending a preliminary hearing, and presenting our evidence to the court. It would be time-consuming and emotionally draining, but he was confident that the case would be dismissed. In the meantime, Veronica went back to her favorite strategy, playing the victim online. A long, dramatic Facebook post appeared on her profile, filled with fake sorrow and revisionist history. She claimed she had been cut off from her niece-nephew for no reason, that she was a loving sister who had done nothing but try to keep her family together. She painted me as the villain, an evil sister-in-law who had stolen her brother and brainwashed him against her. She photoshopped old pictures of herself holding babies, implying that she was a natural caregiver and that it was cruel to deprive her of the opportunity to be an aunt. But this time, it completely backfired. People weren't buying it anymore. The comments section turned into a public takedown, a chorus of voices calling her out for her lies and manipulation. "Weren't you just escorted out of their baby shower by security?" one comment read. "Didn't you try to get your brother fired from his job?" another comment asked. "Maybe you should respect their boundaries instead of suing them," someone else suggested. Even Eric's parents, who had spent years tolerating Veronica's antics, always preferring to stay in the background rather than confront her, reached their limit. After the baby shower incident and the lawsuit, they had finally had enough. When I spoke with them privately, they admitted they had been enabling her behavior for years. They thought it was just her way of showing she cared, they confessed. But we see now we should have stepped in long ago. They promised to testify on our behalf, to tell the court about Veronica's history of harassment and manipulation. They were finally ready to take a stand against their daughter's toxic behavior. That was it. The final nail in the coffin. Veronica deleted the post within minutes, but by then, the screenshots had already spread like wildfire. Her credibility was completely shattered. No one believed her anymore. Then, a week later, the court's decision arrived. A thin envelope containing a single piece of paper that held the key to our future. Case dismissed. Our lawyer called to deliver the news, his voice calm and reassuring. He assured us that Veronica had no legal standing and that the judge had seen through her manipulative tactics. "It's over," he said. "She can't bother you anymore." Eric and I sat in the lawyer's office, going through the paperwork, and for the first time in years, it felt final, real. Linda had no power, no control, nothing left. She had exhausted every option, pulled every string, and played every card. And she had lost. A few days later, one last message came through, from a blocked number. Short, bitter, defeated. "I hope you're happy," it read. "You destroyed this family. I didn't even bother responding. I didn't feel the need to defend myself, to justify my actions. I had done everything I could to protect myself and my family. I had fought for my happiness. And I had won. I just blocked the number." Eric did the same. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "That's the last time she'll ever get to contact us," he said, his voice firm. And just like that, she was gone. No calls, no emails, no sudden unwanted appearances. Just silence. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. A full year has passed since the lawsuit was dismissed. A year without Veronica. A year without drama, manipulation, or backhanded insults. A year of pure, unadulterated peace. And in that year, so much has changed. I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Sarah. She is the light of our lives, filling our home with love, laughter, and the endless wonder of new beginnings. Eric and I have never been happier. We are finally free to raise our daughter in an environment free of toxicity, free of judgment, free of Veronica's insidious influence. There are no more forced family gatherings, no more snide remarks disguised as jokes, no more walking on eggshells, just genuine connection and unwavering support. Veronica has remained completely absent. She has never met our daughter, never sent a gift, never even tried to reach out. Not directly, at least. But despite her silence toward us, Jake still hears things. Rumors, whispers, second-hand accounts of Veronica's unraveling life. And from what he tells us, Linda's life has completely fallen apart. After we cut her off, her entire support system started crumbling. Over time, more and more people distanced themselves from her. Family members who once defended her finally saw her for who she was, and friends who had been in her corner started avoiding her, tired of the endless drama and victim playing. She lost her influence. She lost her reputation. And then she started losing everything else. Her mental health began declining. She had always relied on others to support her emotionally, assuming that no matter what, they would always be there. Without Eric, she had no one to turn to. Her carefully constructed facade started to crack, revealing the fragile, insecure woman beneath. She tried reaching out to distant relatives for sympathy, playing the role of the abandoned sister and aunt. It didn't work. Everyone knew the story by now. They knew how she had treated me, how she had tried to sue us, how she had publicly humiliated herself at my baby shower. No one wanted to deal with her. And then came the final blow. Her marriage fell apart. After years of enabling her behavior, her husband finally realized the truth. She was toxic, and she wasn't going to change. He filed for divorce and moved on with his life, free from the suffocating weight of her drama. Linda was completely alone, bitter, resentful, with no one left to manipulate. Without Eric and her husband, Linda's finances spiraled too. Without financial support, she struggled to maintain the lifestyle she'd always taken for granted. She had to sell her house and downsize, bitter and alone. And despite everything, she still refused to take accountability. To her, she was the victim. We were the villains. And then, one day, a letter arrived in the mail. A familiar, dreaded handwriting on the envelope. It was from Veronica. She was begging for a second chance. She wrote about how much she missed her family, how she regretted the past, how she just wanted to meet her niece. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge what she had done. She just wanted back in. I didn't even consider it. Not for a second. I had spent years enduring her cruelty. I had been humiliated, insulted, and disrespected at every turn. I had given her chance after chance, only for her to double down on her behavior every single time. She had made her choice. She had destroyed every relationship she had. And now, she had to live with the consequences. I tossed the letter straight into the trash. Eric didn't even read it. He didn't ask about it. He just knew. "I don't care what happens to her anymore," he said, his voice flat. And that was that. It was over. I wasn't even angry. I didn't feel bitterness or rage. Just relief. Linda had lost everything. And me? I had built a life filled with love, joy, and peace. As I watch my daughter play, I think about everything we had been through. All the pain, the manipulation, the years of disrespect. And now it was over. Veronica would never be a part of this family again. And the best part? She did it to herself. She paid the price for her actions. And I finally understood that the price of silence is always too high, and that I would never be silent again.